Edinburgh died on the 9th of April 2021, just 8 weeks before his 100th birthday.
I and his whole family, and this and many other countries, owe him a debt greater than he would ever claim, or we shall ever know.
He dedicated his life to duty.
The institution is the thing that matters to the country, and we are merely the temporary tenants of it.
And helped modernize the monarchy.
He was very aware that if a royal dynasty is not in step with its people, it can go.
Who do you think is the most fascinating and exciting man of the 20th century, dead or alive? And at the top of the pops was, in fact, Prince Philip, well ahead of Sean Connery and President Kennedy.
But despite being famously forthright,
As so very often happens, I discovered it would have been much better if I kept my trap shut.
Philip remained an enigma.
He was a public person, but quite a private individual.
Now, using rare interviews recorded throughout his life,
I think people want this intimate relationship. It makes them feel that the family is known to them as neighbors and as credible individuals.
remarkable archive from across the world,
These have got a real home movies quality about them, which is lovely.
and iconic footage colorized here for the very first time, we'll discover the moments that defined the man.
He changed the expectation of the world as to what a prince does.
Philip, prince, husband, father.
The heart of the world is thrilled by the prospect of one royal wedding with a genuine aura of romance.
My goodness, they were young and beautiful, weren't they?
Seen for the first time in color, this is the moment in 1947 the British public met the man who was to marry Princess Elizabeth.
So sweet and young and gorgeous looking.
He was such an immaculate naval officer in terms of accomplishment and also the way he looked.
They looked like a Hollywood couple, actually. They looked so ravishing.
It's the most enchanting little bit of film. He looks confident. She has been in front of the press all her life, but it's him that seems to be putting her at ease.
There's a clear chemistry between them. I mean, what's lovely is this particular moment, she's sort of posing and he's posing alongside her, but then he turns. There, that's the bit there. That's the thing that just, it's obviously something highly inappropriate there. I mean, whatever he's saying, she finds it funny and then tries to keep it all together. But she clearly doesn't want to give anything away.
It was, those of you who can remember it, a fairly drab world. The post-war recovery had hardly even begun, and practically everything was still rationed. Well, everyone seemed to think that our wedding was a very happy occasion and brought a little colour back to life after the dreary war years. At any rate, we certainly thought so.
The royal wedding 4 months later captured the hearts of the nation. And bowing to public demand, the couple shared footage from their honeymoon.
This is just wonderful.
Filmed in black and white, it's the first time it's been seen in color.
The dark years of the war are behind them, and this is, well, it's the beginning of an era, isn't it?
The Duke of Edinburgh didn't view the world through rose-tinted spectacles, but he was a person of great feeling. And sometimes we get access to letters from him when he and the Queen were young. You see that he was romantic in that sense. It was a love match, no doubt at all.
After Philip married Princess Elizabeth, he wrote to Elizabeth's mother, then the Queen, "Lilibet is the only thing in the world which is absolutely real to me. And my ambition is to weld the two of us into a new combined existence that will not only be able to withstand the shocks directed at us, but will also have a positive existence for the good." It shows a much softer side of Philip. This is the man who never revealed his emotions.
At first, Philip combined marriage with his other great love, the Royal Navy.
I was 17 in 38, I suppose it was. Then the war was threatening, and it was apparent to me that the best thing that I could do was to join one of the services anyway, if I could. And at that time, I was virtually stateless, I think. I had a Danish passport, but the Navy said that they'd accept me.
Prince Philip loved reading military history, and he'd read several biographies of Napoleon. And in one of them, he came across something interesting that Napoleon said, which is this: if you want to understand a man, you should know what the world was like in the year that man turned 21. He turned 21 in 1942, and Prince Philip reflected absolutely the values, the attitudes, the sense of humor of people of that generation, that wartime generation. For many people, the best generation.
He served very gallantly through the war, pledged himself very early on to this country.
Philip went back to work for the Royal Navy almost immediately after the wedding. He wasn't someone to just lounge around. And I think blonde hair, you don't really see so much when you're looking at the black and white pictures. I mean, he's strikingly handsome. He was a high achiever, always a golden boy to match his golden locks. You can see very much why the Queen fell for him.
It was in Malta that the Duke of Edinburgh assumed command of HMS Magpie. There's no prouder moment in any sailor's life than his first ship.
Philip's career was going from strength to strength, but his world was about to be turned upside down.
Yeah, I only had her for a year because it all got rather difficult. The late king was not very well, and it was decided that we should go to Canada in 1951, so I had to come back for that. And then the king was going to go to Australia, and he couldn't, so we were sent off on that. And then, of course, he died, so that was the end of the sort of naval career.
When they had the news in 52 that the king had died, I think his world collapsed. His natural place of service, the Navy, was no longer possible. And I think it was a huge shock.
It happened sooner than anyone might have hoped, because the old king, George VI, died at a much earlier age than anyone would have wished for.
The thing is that, well, both the Queen and I got pitchforked into a situation, in a sense, well before our time, well before our age group. And obviously, at 30, pretty intense experience.
When his wife went from princess to queen, Philip would have to put her job first for the rest of his life.
He didn't have the easiest time in those early years because there was a man who was very much an alpha male, having courtiers thinking, who do you think you are? Philip wanted to shake up the whole of how Buckingham Palace was run, but there was fierce resistance.
I think there was a long period, by that I mean sort of 3 or 4 years, in which honestly, he didn't quite know where he fitted in. So I think he was in a maelstrom of emotions and struggle and uncertainty. And I think he was a bit lost.
But in 1956, 3 years after the coronation, Philip embarked on a tour that would change his life forever.
The thing about going to sea is you're suddenly exposed to an element which you can't really control. You're subject to it, and I think that's quite good for the soul, frankly.
I think one of the epoch moments for Prince Philip was 1956, when he was asked and joyfully accepted the invitation to travel.
It was, in a sense, his first solo mission, going to parts of the Commonwealth that no member of the royal family had ever visited before.
Whilst the Queen was kept busy with affairs of state, Philip acted as her envoy in far-flung corners of the globe.
I've been round the world and covered nearly 40,000 miles since the 15th of October last year.
I think that tour was pivotal because that's when he found himself again.
He loved this trip. And he was free to grow a beard, free to be his own man.
We weren't going anywhere with big populations and places where we had to stand to attention and parade, and so we were allowed to grow a beard without permission. We had a competition to see who grew the best. They brought a whale catcher alongside us in the Antarctic, and he was put into one of the baskets and hoisted up.
Prince Philip transferred to the whale catcher by an old sailor's method, which is never without a bit of excitement.
He was very much a Navy man, no doubt about that. He was a good sport all round. He used to play deck hockey. He'd come with the yacht's company, and it was a dangerous sport, mind you, a few broken legs. He did wander around quite a lot and come and have a chat with us and see how we were getting on. But he was always working. He was reading or doing something.
It must be so marvellous on these particular journeys, just to be free and in the open, wild, cold air. Stumbling across streams, taking your own camera with you.
He took with him a Hasselblad camera, and he was fascinated by the birds and started taking lots of photographs of them. I think in that experience gave him that sense of how important it was to save this beautiful planet. That then drew him even closer to what would eventually end up as his role in the formation of the World Wildlife Fund.
He was him himself. He wasn't 3 steps behind the Queen. And I think it gave him a sense of vocation.
By Christmas 1956, Philip had been away from his wife and family for 2 months.
For Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, this was the farthest point of a 40,000-mile Commonwealth journey. A long way from home to spend Christmas.
I know the Duke of Edinburgh was frustrated the way his 1956 Commonwealth tour on Britannia became controversial, because at the time, he was excited by it, thought he was doing something really worthwhile. He was going to be going to parts of the Commonwealth that no member of the British royal family had ever visited before. So he thought, I'm doing good stuff. And then to find that he was the subject of criticism for being so long away from home, it made no sense to him, partly because, of course, he was a naval man and people in the Navy are used to long tours of duty. This was really what he'd been trained to do. So he found that frustrating. And then the whole story became about, where is Philip at Christmas? Why is he away?
Philip was enjoying his freedom from palace life, but his long absence was attracting unwelcome attention.
There were rumours in the press that there were problems in the royal marriage. That started really because there was an article related to many years earlier about his friendship with a theatrical star. Well, Prince Philip was very handsome. Obviously, before he married the Queen, he'd had girlfriends. You know, he had a reputation of being a ladies' man. It had nothing to do with what was going on at the time.
The rumours were compounded by the fact that his right-hand man was caught up in a divorce scandal.
A shadow falls on the last stages of the Duke of Edinburgh's tour. Lieutenant Commander Michael Parker, his friend and secretary, has resigned.
Anything fresh and new, I'd give it to you, but I'm afraid I haven't.
Well, Mike Parker was one of Philip's closest friends. They used to like to party together. And of course, when Mike's wife filed for divorce, what was becoming the story was, oh, well, there's a problem wrong in that marriage. Maybe there's a problem with the royal marriage.
It grew to become so intrusive, the media, and the treatment of him was so rude and dismissive that it did hurt.
Philip returned from the tour under a cloud of suspicion, and the world waited to see how the Queen would react. In February 1957, Philip returned from a solo world tour. He had been away from his family for 4 months, and there was speculation about the state of the royal marriage. But within days, the Queen showed the strength of their union by making Philip a prince.
At the Mansion House, the Lord Mayor of London greets the Duke of Edinburgh. It is the Duke's first big public engagement since the Queen conferred on him the title of the Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh.
I think he was very pleased that the Queen made him a Prince of the United Kingdom in recognition of the tour that he had just made. People don't realize that actually for 10 years he wasn't a prince at all. When he became a British citizen, he gave up being a Prince of Greece and became the Duke of Edinburgh. So she was saying, up yours to everybody else.
The Queen was asserting Philip's importance to the country and to her, despite the gossip.
The press had really blown it up into a major story, and it irritated the Duke. In fact, he made a speech sort of alluding to that a few days after he came back.
The tour, says the Duke, naturally involved the personal sacrifice of being separated from his wife and children for a considerable time.
This Commonwealth, of which every member is so proud, came into existence because people made sacrifices and offered their service to it. And I, for one, am prepared to sacrifice a good deal, if by so doing I can advance its well-being even by a small degree.
Philip had sacrificed his naval career for the Queen and spent time away from his family so she wouldn't have to. And when he returned, he supported the Queen by helping raise their young children.
It was always the case with the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh that the Queen was the head of state, head of nation, but Prince Philip was head of the family. And I think those roles worked very well. He was a very hands-on father.
He wanted them to have a good, secure, happy childhood within the constraints of their mother being the Queen and him being the Duke of Edinburgh and having a lot of stuff to do.
Another treat is the horse show at Windsor, although the English weather can be chilly.
Oh, this is sweet. I've not seen this before. And there's Anne. Oh, look at her. Now that's interesting. This is him in a caring mode, and we don't tend to think of him as that much of a carer, making sure that Anne is warm enough. Very sweet. Philip was very good with his children. He could be quite a rough character. Charles was a very sensitive child, and Philip just didn't understand that. He was such a robust man himself. Philip really wanted his son, particularly, to be in his image, and he wasn't.
The royal children are sturdy and encouraged to take the rough with the smooth. Prince Charles plays cricket and football, sails, swims and rides, both horse and bicycle.
Philip was a natural sportsman. I think that he therefore thought that it would be a really good thing for his children.
Team games particularly, I think, help them to learn about how to behave. They've got to learn to be successful and how to lose and how to cooperate and how to submerge themselves into a team. I think all that's good news.
Prince Philip was in charge of making all the decisions around schools. And, he was very keen that Prince Charles go to Gordonstoun. The Queen was less keen, but he had his way.
The heir to the throne of England is to attend Gordonstoun, the alma mater of his father, Prince Philip. Charles will sleep in a dormitory with a dozen other boys and will be routed out at 7 a.m. for a run around the grounds. Rumor has it that the young prince was reluctant about attending this academy with its Spartan routine.
I think he probably thought that it might knock Charles into shape and make him a more robust character. And of course it had actually the complete opposite effect.
Here, the Duke of Edinburgh and Prince Charles examine a kayak presented to them.
I once said to Prince Philip, it's strange that people say that you and Prince Charles are so different, when to me you seem to be so similar in many ways. You walk in the same way, you talk in the same way, you share so many interests in, young people, in nature, in art, in science. And he said, oh, yes, he said, but there is a difference. I'm a pragmatist and Prince Charles is a romantic.
In terms of character, you almost couldn't find two men more far apart. Philip was very stiff upper lip, roll with the punches, don't take things too personally. Anyone that knew both of them would say that the Prince of Wales is rather different and is much more of a sensitive soul than that and feels things much more keenly and personally than his father did.
Philip adored his boarding school. Charles hated it. For Philip, grew up in a profoundly dysfunctional family. I mean, shockingly dysfunctional family, frankly. And school, here in the UK, boarding school gave him a firm foundation.
His childhood was extraordinary. His grandfather, the King of Greece, was assassinated. His parents had to leave Greece. They were driven into exile when Prince Philip was a little boy. They lived in Paris. They didn't have much money. Then his parents separated. His father floated down to the south of France and ended up living with a girlfriend down there. His mother had a mental breakdown and was in a clinic for some years.
We talked about this. He decided, I think, very early on that he was not going to be a victim of his upbringing.
Philip didn't dwell on the past. He focused on the future. He knew he could connect to people in a way the Queen couldn't, and make a real difference to the way the monarchy was perceived.
I feel that I may have a position, whatever influence I have, I want to use for the benefit of the country. Therefore, I feel that I ought to be doing my best for the community. This is really in whatever way I can.
I think that tour in '56 gave him a chance to see that he had a position in his own right as Duke of Edinburgh that made it possible for things to happen. And boy, did he make some things happen.
If you knew him, as it were, in his prime, you would be bowled over by the man's energy, the amount that he packed into a day. Eventually, I became the appeals chairman of the National Playing Fields Association. And what I liked about him was that he used to go into the office every day and run the show on a daily basis.
He was at his office at 10 in the morning and he wouldn't leave till the in tray was all in the out tray. You know, he was much loved by the people who worked for him.
Philip realized he could put his popularity to good use.
The publicity which surrounds, let's say, a visit that I make isn't necessarily publicity about me, but it's about the thing which is being visited. Using a little intelligence, you can actually pick places to draw attention to because they're valid or valuable.
There was a different energy with Philip. So the Queen, there's a sort of awe and wonder, but I think Philip, there was much more kind of interaction with the crowds.
I mean, he really was so handsome and so charming. And he was, voted Britain's most popular man, the world's most popular prince. He was absolutely a golden person.
Philip loved pretty women. He was quite flirtatious. I don't think it necessarily meant anything. But it's another way of interacting with people, of putting people at their ease.
Miss Muriel Roberts has worked with the company for 20 years. Prince Philip stops for a chat with her.
He's utterly charming. Wherever he is, he just speaks to whoever he wants. He's egalitarian, I would say, utterly non-grand.
One of the things that most surprised me, I grew up in a huge working class housing estate. I went to the local school. I never expected to be in a position of having this kind of friendship with a member of the royal family. Did it make any difference to him? Not an iota.
And I think that people ought to be judged much more by what they are and how they behave than entirely on the basis of what they do to earn their living.
The Queen had to maintain a degree of distance, but Philip realized the monarchy had to become more open and accessible.
The essence of the monarchy is a very personal relationship. I mean, people respond to the individual as well as to the institution. And it only really functions if people know the members.
He was very aware that if a royal dynasty is not in step with its people, it can go. He was the product of that in Greece, where he had to be exiled away. His father could have been executed. And so even though the royal family in Britain was fairly established, he realized that you've got to be in step with the people.
And he was a driving force in maintaining their popularity.
Who do you think is the most fascinating and exciting man of the 20th century, dead or alive, was the question. And at the top of the pops was, in fact, Prince Philip, well ahead of Sean Connery and President Kennedy.
Philip knew the media was key to the monarchy's future, but it was to become a love-hate relationship.
Why don't you stuff it up, you old head?
Since the first days of television, Prince Philip realized it could help make the monarchy more accessible. He was the first member of the royal family to present a TV show in 1957.
40 minutes to get round the world. Well, it's going to be a bit of a rush. It may leave you a little bit muddled, but I hope at least that you'll have seen a number of places and a number of things that you haven't seen before.
And in 1961, he became the first royal to give a television interview.
In this country alone, I think there are something like 10,000 major occasions stunts have been organised.
That's 5 million people on that calculation who are concerned with it in some way.
Well, your mathematics are better than mine.
I did it beforehand.
Philip went on a one-man mission to raise the profile of the monarchy by making multiple television appearances.
Our guest in Face the Press tonight has flown up here especially from London in order to take part in the programme. And he is His Royal Highness Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh.
Tonight, television viewers all over Australia are invited to meet His Royal Highness, the Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh.
He would argue, he would debate, and as you may know, Prince Philip has a certain reputation for being forthright.
What did you have in mind about the South Wales Valleys, or for that matter, the North?
Are you Welsh?
Well, originally, yes, long time
But
back.
you've seen the South Wales?
I have, and
valleys?
that's what I'd like to hear what you think about it.
I mean, do you really think that we ought to do that sort of thing again?
I don't.
No.
But
Well, that's exactly what I meant.
Prince Philip was a naturally forthright person. If he was asked a question, he gave an honest reply. And I do remember he once said to me, "There's no harm in disagreeing. Why do we all have to agree about everything?"
I mean, you do have one function anyway, as I see it, among many others, which is to help promote monarchy and the image of monarchy, and to look after it very carefully.
No, you make it sound as if I was some sort of PR agency. No, no, I don't. In fact, I'm very doubtful about the whole concept of deliberately trying to create an image, because I think that it's very easily rumbled.
Some people thought that he was abrupt, brusque, rude. I don't think he ever meant to be. He was just being himself.
Philip threw himself into engaging with the public.
He's a great mover and shaker, and he was the first to say, let the light in on this. Let's film these things. Let's show people what it is.
I think that surprised me was that you write most of your speeches yourself.
Yes, I do it myself.
I mean, is that stern sense of duty, or is it because you want to say something particularly?
No, it's just, I don't know, it just seems to be the obvious way of doing it, I think.
He realised that that was a way to connect with the public, because, you know, you have to be relevant and you have to be known.
How far can you go in your efforts to humanise, if you like, perhaps, and yet retain some of the mystique of the royal family? How far can you go towards meeting the people?
Well, how far is far? I think you've got to strike a balance somehow. Yes. I think that what has happened anyway is that, particularly through the medium of this device, is that the whole thing has become much more intimate. And since people know each other very much better, I think people know us better, and we know people better. And I think people want this intimate relationship. It makes them feel that the family is known to them as neighbours and as credible individuals.
He could probably see the longer-term implications that, of course, once you've let in the media to your personal lives, then the media want to know even more. They don't just leave it there. They dig and dig and dig.
Would you mind talking a little about the family now, your relationship with the children?
Yeah, we like each other. We like each other.
Yeah. What sort of family discussions do you have about your own problems as members of a royal family?
Several.
Pardon?
Several.
Yeah. Would you mind telling us what they are?
Yeah, I mean, I would, yes.
Yeah.
I reckon this is for internal discussion.
Yes. Yeah.
Not for public discussion.
Yeah.
I was in London a few weeks ago and I spoke to the Prince. I spent an hour with him. He is a very informal man. The press conference will be completely open, but you ask him any personal questions about his family. He won't talk about that. There are 100 subjects he will talk about.
I once said to Prince Philip, "You're the person who brought the media in. You gave the first television interview." He stopped me immediately. He said, "Yes, about the work I was doing. Of course, you used the media. When I arrived in the 1950s, it was new. There wasn't ITV. The BBC was only just beginning on television, and I used it to talk about the projects, not to talk about myself." And that was his rule. Talk about what you're doing, don't talk about yourself.
Philip had opened the door to the media, and it couldn't be closed.
It was a sort of love-hate relationship with the press. He was irritated by them.
There are certain things occasionally which they do, which perhaps I don't like very much. I think the business of overhearing conversations. I mean, if you're having a conversation and somebody pokes one of these at you with a tape recorder behind, or one of those long listening devices which they can overhear a conversation, 20 yards away, you get a bit anxious.
Why don't you stuff it up, you old Take the bloody thing right out. Come on.
Don't do that. Be kind to him.
You see, infuriated, somebody's snapping at him.
He's saying, you know, fair's fair. If you're having a private conversation, it should be a private conversation. He didn't want someone shoving a camera in his face because that's when things could get misinterpreted.
I know he became very frustrated with the way he was handled, particularly by the British press. If he went on a foreign tour and he saw that there were British press covering it, his heart would sink, because he'd know that there'd be no coverage at all unless there was a gaffe. Then the gaffe would be front-page news. That's all they were looking for. And they turned him into a caricature.
We run out of film yet?
Sometimes Philip's off-the-cuff conversations, combined with his knack of putting his foot in it, made for good headlines. In time, this would increasingly come to define him in the press.
Because he was colourful and because he did make remarks that were, well, in today's terms, politically deeply incorrect, he was criticised.
The press were looking for those guys. I was one of them, I know, and it almost caricatures him, really. The fact is, he did get things wrong. And the slitty-eyed comment in China, that was a mistake.
He absolutely recognised that he did have a gift for saying the wrong thing. He actually came up with a term himself of dontopodology, foot in mouth.
Obviously, I make mistakes, good heavens. I'm not pretending I don't.
Yes.
As so very often happens, I discovered it would have been much better if I kept my trap shut.
Unfortunately for Prince Philip, sometimes that image of him as gaffe-prone has slightly overshadowed a lot of the brilliant work that he's done over the years.
But it wasn't just Philip who had to withstand press scrutiny.
Is there not a terrible fear that the whole limelight will be thrown upon your eldest son? Well, what will you do to either protect him for it or make it more tolerable?
Well, I think it's very difficult to know how to make it more tolerable. Having perhaps more experience, one can either make it a bit easier by pointing out the pitfalls and by warning what might happen under certain circumstances, and making him aware of what is in fact going on as much as possible, and how these things happen, and the fact that it has happened before. One lives through these periods.
He knew that to find yourself in the newspapers, accused of all sorts of things, criticised for all sorts of things, you need to be quite a tough character to survive that. And I suspect he thought that Charles would find it really difficult. I don't think anybody could have foreseen what happened in the 80s and 90s.
By the early 90s, the press frenzy that surrounded his son's failing marriage reached fever pitch.
Prince and Princess of Wales put on brave faces again today during their South Korean tour.
It's the media that's causing the problems and the reporters. Leave them alone.
Well, they've got problems like everybody else, but I think it's time everybody left them alone.
Paparazzi. I don't think they were called that when he was first the victim of it. But when it came to his children and grandchildren being photographed with long lenses, I mean, he found it despairing.
I think the only two aversions I have is to the gossip writer who doesn't really bear much relation to fact and is not intended to be particularly constructive, and to the keyhole cameraman who is, in a sense, trying to find something out of the ordinary with which to titillate his customers.
I think it has been extraordinarily difficult, and I think he watched the destruction of parts of his family, Princess Diana in particular, who he was very, very fond of, very gentle towards. He tried to help her fit into this weird family. He was a kind of outsider himself who had made it in, but knew the kind of vicious sharks that swim around the royal family and that are ready to pick you off if they can and deride and mock.
I think it depressed him that, as he put it to me once, the the press turned the royal family into a bit of a soap opera.
Prince Philip knew that, if you're doing something wrong, such as having adulterous affairs, then the press are likely to find out about it. And under the new no-holds-barred press of the 80s and 90s, they were going to put it in the paper. He didn't like the press. He didn't particularly have any affection for the journalists either. Far from it. But he knew they had a job to do. It was up to his family to not give them those opportunities to write about them.
I would have thought Philip was pretty horrified by Charles admitting his adultery to Jonathan Dimbleby. So many of the stories that came out during that period were so damaging, not just to the individuals, but also to the integrity of the monarchy, which Philip and Elizabeth had worked so hard over so many years to get right.
He grew to become deeply saddened and distrustful. I remember when Prince Philip and I went to northern Greece. It was the week in which those very distressing photographs of Fergie and her financial advisor and the toe-sucking incident had come up. And he had been hounded by the media, but we shook them all off. And he was in the most appalling mood on the ferry back. He was going back to this rough old world.
But the prince and his family were about to face one of their biggest challenges.
Diana, Princess of Wales, has died, according to British sources.
In 1997, when Diana died, the royal family faced one of their greatest crises. And in this defining moment, Philip chose to put his family first.
There's no doubt that Prince Philip will have felt, first and foremost, his duty was, as a grandfather, to protect and console William and Harry, who had just lost their mother in horrendous circumstances.
But not for the first time. His actions were misinterpreted.
It wasn't his idea, but there was a tradition at royal funerals of members of the family walking behind the hearse. And there was no plan originally for Prince Philip to be part of that. Prince Philip said to Prince William, if it would help, I can walk alongside you. So he volunteered to do that. Prince William accepted the invitation. So far from being what was reported, it was an act of grandfatherly kindness to grant offer support to Prince William.
He's come in for criticism for that, but it was not his choice, not his idea. And there's a moment where they go under the Horse Guards Parade Arch, where it's quite clear that Prince Philip, and I asked him about this, he said, yes, I didn't think the cameras could see us. And at that point, he turns to William, who he's walking beside, and And you've just got to watch that moment and realize here is a grandfather who is trying to help his young, very vulnerable grandson struggle through this awful, awful moment. He knew what it was like to be a member of a dysfunctional family. He did his damnedest to make sure that did not happen to his grandchildren.
One day, the future of the monarchy would rest on William's shoulders, so Philip did his best to support him.
I think with William, it's down to the Queen and Prince Philip actually realizing here was someone who could go off the rails, who was at danger of a life that could become badly disorientated because of what he'd been through. And they gave him a firm and solid foundation. And there's the fruits to this day.
I think William and Harry's relationship with Prince Philip has always been very important to both of them in terms of, William has spoken a lot about the sense of duty that he has watched and inherited from his grandparents. And, you only have to look at what William and Harry are incredibly interested in terms of their public-facing work. Conservation of the environment, which, yes, of course, is inherited from the Prince of Wales, but it comes from the Duke of Edinburgh. Those things he was interested in for years have become the cornerstones of his grandchildren's work now.
In 2017, Prince Philip decided it was time to hand over to the next generation, and he surprised the world by retiring from public life.
Prince Philip's final official engagement with the Royal Marines on the forecourt of Buckingham Palace had a lot of people sort of hairs on their arms because everything about that day represented everything brilliant about Philip. It was pouring with rain. It was awful conditions for someone in their 90s to come out. But out he came in his mac and his bowler hat. I think that image of him, doffing his hat was just so poignant and moving. I think people got a sense then of, what we were losing.
The last time I went to an official event with the Duke of Edinburgh, he came into the room and he ran towards the dais and jumped up onto it and began speaking. He was in his early 90s. He had essentially done 70 years of service. And I think the Queen thought, well, actually, why doesn't he take some time off? Why doesn't he do his own thing for a while? And he agreed. If the Queen was happy for him to do that, he said he would, and he did.
I think the Queen would have had a really awfully much harder time. Her whole life is duty, so she would never have given it up. But without Prince Philip by her side, I think it would have been intolerable. I think he's been there all the way through.
What did Prince Philip give the Queen? Well, so much, obviously. But I think he made her laugh, and that's a wonderful thing. And of course, he treated her normally, because nobody in the world treats the Queen normally, even her children, except the Duke of Edinburgh did. And, he treated her as a woman, as his wife. And, of course, nobody in the world could say to the Duke of Edinburgh, Philip, do shut up, except the Queen. And she did.
All too often, I fear Prince Philip has had to listen to me speaking. Frequently, we have discussed my intended speech beforehand. And as you will imagine, his views have been expressed in a forthright manner. He is someone who doesn't take easily to compliments, but he has quite simply been my strength and stay all these years. And I and his whole family, and this and many other countries, owe him a debt greater than he would ever claim, or we shall ever know.
The last year and a half of Philip's life, he spent more time with the Queen than he probably had done for years before that, because they came together at Windsor and they isolated together at Windsor for, the best part of a year. But that would have been very precious to the Queen to have had that time with him before he passed away.
Prince Philip died on the 9th of April, 2021. At his funeral, his family walked behind his coffin, led by his eldest son.
I think that Charles and Philip, as the years went by, the relationship did become closer. There was a an understanding and a sort of greater forgiveness.
The last decade or so, I think that both Charles and Philip have both mellowed, but both learnt to respect each other and respect each other's point of views. Not necessarily agree with each other, but respect each other.
For Charles to go and visit his father in hospital, I think was very important. You know, it was a handing on of the baton, but I suspect that it was a healing process as much as anything else. After all these years of discord between them, I would think it was a very loving moment and an important moment for both of them, actually.
As you can imagine, my family and I miss my father enormously. He was a much-loved and appreciated figure.
The Queen had lost her husband, the family, their father and grandfather, and the nation, its longest-serving royal consort.
As the Queen said once, grief is the price we pay for love. What do you do in a difficult time? You carry on. That's what the Queen has always done. Carried on. In the pandemic, we will meet again. The show goes on, and she is Queen for life. Her attitude would be, what is the good of sitting around moping? That's not what Prince Philip would have wanted.
He changed the expectation of the world as to what a prince does. He has made this, I think, a gentler world, a more fascinating world, at times a funnier world. But I think most importantly, he has helped us see that if you think something is worth doing, then just jolly well get on, try it. And it might just succeed beyond all your wildest expectations. It's what happened to me because of him. It's happened to many others because of him.
Well, I never thought of it as a role. I mean, it's just a way of life. I mean, it's just, I just got on with what seems to be the sensible thing to do under the circumstances.
You'll be remembered as an extraordinarily brave, marvellous leader.
His view of life was look up and out, not down and in.
There was no way I could say to him, what is your legacy? Because he would just go, I haven't done anything. So the others.
I think if he knew this programme was being made, he'd go, what on earth for? What on earth for? What's there to say?
Another stupid programme made by parents. Can't you live your own life? That's what we're saying. Why aren't you living your own life? Why aren't you living your own life? What have you done this year? That's what he's saying to you. Saying at least the cameraman's keeping quiet. That's what he's saying.
What would you like to be remembered for?
Well, it doesn't really concern me very much because when I drop dead, I mean, I'm not going to be around to find out what people do remember, so it doesn't really bother me all that much.
Isn't there anything, though, that you're particularly proud of having achieved?
No, I don't think so. I think keeping out of trouble, I think, probably.